So we move on now to a term that is bandied around quite substantially, sustainability, environmental sustainability. The first thing we need to do is to actually define what this word actually refers to. Um, and is generally described as the ability to live and survive within our own means for generation to generation in ways that promote health and satisfaction for all. So it's essentially about the survival of the human race in basically to the standard that we're already used to, and perhaps even to a better standard in terms of health. Um, there is another important aspect to it, and that is living in harmony with our environment. And it depends on which perspective of sustainability you actually adhere to as to how strong this particular focus is. And there's also a further extension of sustainability, environmental sustainability, which involves supporting ecological systems of which we are part. So, in fact, this understanding that yes, we are actually part of the ecological makeup of the environment, and basically our actions affect biodiversity, the quality of land, sea, and air. So, if we look at what sorts of things are actually threatening our sustainability, clearly the one that's in the media most of the time is about climate change and global warming, and in particular what's called anthropogenic, which means man-made, anthropogenic climate change. Peak oil, which basically refers to the fact that there's only a tangible amount of a limit to the oil that is available, and we will reach, some believe we already have reached the peak of our ability to actually produce oil. Degradation of the very things that we're trying to actually maintain a balance for, so biodiversity, land, water, and air. Economic rationalization, which means a focus purely on the economy as the main outcome indicator. This desire for humans to consume and consume more and more. The globalized economy, which means that people who actually own resources don't necessarily live in the areas where the resources are being exploited. And all of these threats automatically threaten human health, well-being, and survival. So these are fairly major issues. Now, just this next slide actually looks at peak oil, and it's just a reminder as to how much we actually rely on fossil fuels for agricultural production. So food, it's a very oversimplification, but food equals oil. And you can see here, over the course between 1910 to 1960, you can see the decline in the use of farm animals to actually drive the production of food. And from about 1918 onwards, the dramatic rise in the dependence on tractors. And basically tractors use oil. So you can see here what a dramatic increase in the dependence on oil in terms of just a simple and basic piece of farm machinery, that is this tractors. Not to mention that oil, the petrochemical industry also is very much involved in the production of fertilizer. So here we are, we're very dependent for our food production on oil. Now, if we look at that first, very important, if we go back to the slide previously looking at the threats, you can see here that climate change and global warming are very important threats to sustainability. Now, if we look at climate change and what climate change means, we can see here that drought, fires, floods, extreme weather, then there are diseases. Now, a very simple story about diseases is that if we have the Earth here with the equator going around the middle and basically the Tropic of Capricorn, Tropic of Cancer here, this is the tropics. Now, as Now, most of the diseases like malaria basically affect the areas in the tropics, which has a particular weather pattern. But as the climate, the globe becomes more warm, the climate, the extension of this warm band around the tropics actually grows, which means that more and more of the Earth's surface is going to be confronted with diseases like malaria that are spread by mosquitoes. Agriculture and food production, of course, as climate changes, certain foods that were produced in one area of the world won't be able to be produced in that part of the world, so there'll be transition in the types of crops that are produced. All this leads to financial stress. If there's not stability in terms of economy and politics, then social breakdown is a likely outcome, and that will have implications for the prevalence of mental illness. There's basically a progression through here, which ultimately leads to significant health factors. Peak oil, as I pointed out before, oil essentially equals food. These days, with the amount of food that needs to be produced, we cannot produce sufficient food without oil, using the specific technology that is available to us at the present time. So peak oil is where the demand for oil exceeds production. As I said, with food and many other activities, we have so much dependence on oil. It's quite remarkable how fragile the global economy is if oil were to disappear overnight. Food insecurity, because I spoke about on-farm production with oil, spoke about fertilizer, but there is one other very important aspect of oil in terms of food production, and that is distribution. How do we actually get food from the farms to the consumers? Essentially is via oil. So you can see here that oil again is so important for food on a range of different levels. So once peak oil occurs, if we don't have a contingency plan, if we don't have another way to actually harvest food on the farm, to fertilize soil so that food can be produced, and we don't have another way except via oil to distribute food, there's potentially a crisis waiting to happen. Moving on to the degradation of those very important resources that we have: biodiversity, land, water, and air. So we've got a range of different issues happening: soil erosion, also depletion of fertility of soils, species extinction, which means that biodiversity is reducing. We've got a range of pollution issues. Not only do we depend on oil for a range of food production factors, but in fact that oil that we use actually leads to pollution of land, water, and air. So through transport, energy production, through petrochemical industries, through manufacturing, wastage, etc., and building and infrastructure. All these factors actually result in pollution. Now, again, with the precarious nature of energy production, food and water, clean food, clean water is becoming more and more scarce. So we need strategies to actually address these issues now, not when it's far too late. We have decreased access to natural environments because the number of natural environments and the access are reducing quite substantially. We have problems with shelter infrastructure, especially if population growth continues to grow as it has. And we can see patterns across populations of diseases in terms of physical, mental, and social factors, which are quite substantial. So this sort of paints a fairly bleak picture. Most of these activities are due to the economic rationalism. So the focus on short-term economic gain and not really thinking about what the consequences of the future might be. And some of the other considerations that we need to make when we do anything, essentially, when we consume any goods, that we need to think about the environment, we need to think about the broader impact on society, health and well-being, and the longer-term economy. Not just think about the profit for tomorrow, but think about it for next year and a decade to come. And the so-called junk food category of foods is actually quite interesting. You can see here that this is an unnamed confectionery product. Very low food value except for energy. It's got a high degree of packaging. It's distributed from one factory to all over Australia. It's actually owned by a multinational company, so any of the profits that are made, a large proportion actually drift out of the country back to the original share owners in another country. So this is an example of economic rationalism and globalization that in fact takes its toll on local economies. Consumerism was another factor which has a major impact on sustainability. This idea that more is better. Now, the concept of more is better relates to this idea, this focus on growth, economic growth as the model for economic success. So we must grow markets, we must grow consumption, but at the same time we've got this obesity crisis where what we're trying to do is to reduce consumption, reduce overconsumption. So basically, how do we reconcile these two apparently conflicting models? And this is a very important aspect. A lot of the consumerism is probably unnecessary because it's associated more with wants rather than needs. There's a lot of wastage, so a lot of energy is used to produce things which are ultimately just thrown away in a fairly short space of time. We tend to buy more than what we need. We tend to only think in the short term. We've got a range of social issues that are at play nowadays. To actually get ahead in society, you need at least two salary earners in a particular household to actually get ahead. And this has substantial impacts on the structure of the family and also mental breakdown. But all these factors related to consumerism actually, again, depend on the energy that we use for our daily lives, which has an impact on climate change, peak oil, and also as humans dominate the landscape more and more, there's less room for other species to actually live and prosper. Now, globalization, I've mentioned globalization previously, but globalization involves processes where goods are produced a long way away from where they're consumed, and this has issues in relation to transport of goods. So goods might be made in a country in Asia where wages are low and then have to be transported across the ocean to another country that costs money, but it also costs fossil fuels. And the overall impact of this, of course, is that the jobs in the destination country are disappearing because it's actually cheaper to produce the goods in a poor country. And as I say, the process of transporting goods from one country to another consumes fossil fuel, which in turn affects climate change and also takes more and more space away from the other species that we're trying to live our lives, share the earth with.